The ancient Chinese food pond idea has a very modern problem. Most people remember the fish. They forget the water. These ponds were not built just to reflect the sky or hold a few ornamental fish. In the right conditions, a quiet patch of water could become a small source of protein. Not enough to replace a grocery store, not a miracle food machine, but enough to make one corner of a yard do more than look pretty. That sounds simple, which is exactly why it gets copied badly. A homeowner sees the visible parts first. Dig a hole, add a liner, fill it with water, buy fish, and wait for food. On video, that looks like a complete plan. In a real backyard, the first signs of failure are not dramatic at first. The water turns cloudy. A sour smell starts near the edge. The ammonia reading climbs. Then the fish begin hanging near the surface, looking for oxygen the pond is not giving them. The missing step is not expensive equipment. It is knowing whether the water is ready. A test strip does not make the old system work better. It simply lets a modern homeowner read the pond faster than sight and smell alone. It shows whether the water is starting to behave like habitat or whether it is still just sitting there like a container. That is why a practical backyard version should not begin with a bucket of fish. It might begin with a 10 by 15-foot pond in a back corner, a roll of pond liner, a few pots of aquatic plants, and an empty surface that stays empty for a reason. Before the fish arrive, the pond needs wet surfaces for bacteria, plant roots pulling nutrients, oxygen moving through the water, and tiny life forming the bottom of the food chain. The old idea was never just put fish in water. It was to let the water become alive enough that fish can belong there. Not the day fish go in, the day the water is ready for them. The old Chinese food pond idea was not really about owning fish. It was about making water useful. That is a very different way to look at a backyard pond. In a modern yard, a pond usually enters as decoration. It is placed where it looks good from the patio. The edge is trimmed clean. The water is kept as clear as possible. The fish are chosen because they are bright, visible, and pleasant to watch. There is nothing wrong with that kind of pond. It just has a different purpose. A food pond is closer to backyard infrastructure. It has to hold water, absorb sunlight, shelter small life, and eventually support fish without turning every feeding, every waste problem, and every oxygen problem into a daily emergency. It can still look good, but beauty is not the main test. Function is. That is what makes the old idea easy to misunderstand. If you only copy the shape, you get a hole with water in it. If you copy the function, you get a place where water slowly becomes productive. The difference is not obvious from 10 feet away. Both ponds may have plants around the edge. Both may have fish below the surface. Both may look calm in the afternoon sun. But one is being maintained as a display. The other is being prepared as a working food system. For an ordinary homeowner, that distinction matters before the first shovel hits the ground. A food pond needs a different location, a different timeline, and a different kind of patience. You are not just asking, where would a pond look nice? You are asking, where can this water stay stable long enough to become useful? That question leads to the practical part, not a farm pond, not a commercial fish operation. A food pond starts with the right expectations, the right limits, and the right starting plan from the first day. The practical version begins with a piece of ground, not a bucket of fish. A useful scale is still a 10 by 15-foot pond, because it is small enough to fit in an ordinary backyard, but large enough to behave more like a pond than a plastic tub. The best place is not automatically the prettiest spot. It is the spot where the pond can get light, avoid chemical runoff, stay away from foundation problems, and be made safe for children or pets before water ever goes in. That is the safety check. It should be quick, but it should not be skipped. Then the design becomes physical. Think of the pond in 3 parts. Around the edge, there should be shallow shelves for aquatic plants. Along some of those shelves, gravel and smooth river stones can create wet surfaces where bacteria can live. Toward the center, the pond should drop deeper, with a target around 4 to 5 feet if the site, climate, and local rules allow it. That depth is not there to make the pond look serious. It gives the water a larger, slower-moving body. Very shallow water heats faster, cools faster, and can run into oxygen problems more quickly. A deeper center gives fish a more stable place later, especially when weather swings hard. The first build does not need to look dramatic. It may look like a lined hole with planting ledges, a few stones, and pots of aquatic plants set around the edges. That is not failure. That is the pond being given structure before it is given animals. For the first several weeks, the job is not harvest. The job is observation. The plants need time to settle. The stones and wet surfaces need time to become colonized by bacteria. The water readings need time to stop acting like a brand new container and start acting more like a small habitat. If the water clouds, smells sour, or shows rising ammonia, that is not a reason to add fish faster. It is a reason to wait. When fish finally come in, the first stocking should be light. The species should be legal, region appropriate, and suited to the climate, not just chosen because they grow fast in a video. The goal is not to load the pond for maximum output on day one. The goal is to let the pond prove it can carry life without being pushed into failure. That is the practical small version. One measured backyard pond, built in layers, planted before it is stocked, watched before it is trusted, and treated as a food system only after the water has started behaving like one. A food pond becomes useful when waste has a path. The first path is the nitrogen cycle. Fish waste, uneaten feed, and rotting plant matter release ammonia. In a young pond, ammonia is the warning. Bacteria convert ammonia into nitrite, then nitrate, which plants and algae can use in smaller amounts. That is the invisible engine behind the old food pond idea. But nitrogen alone does not feed a family. Older food pond systems expanded this chain with characters. Plants gave the water edges, shade, and nutrient demand. Algae and tiny aquatic life turned sunlight into the bottom of a food web. Fish fed from that web, while still adding waste back into the water. In some older pond systems, ducks added another layer. They grazed, stirred the edges, dropped manure into the pond, and turned insects, weeds, and leftover garden material into eggs and fertility. That sounds efficient because it is efficient. It is also where modern backyard versions can go wrong. A duck is not a magic upgrade. Too many ducks can overload the water faster than plants, and bacteria can process it. Too many fish can do the same thing. Too much duckweed can cover the surface and block oxygen exchange. Too much feed can turn a pond from a loop into a waste bucket. So the mechanism is not add more living things. It is match the load to the pond's ability to process it. That is why the test strip matters after the build. It is reading the pressure inside the loop. Ammonia says waste is arriving faster than the filter can handle. Nitrite says the cycle is still incomplete. Nitrate says the pond is moving waste farther down the chain, where plants and algae can take part of the load. The old system was not magic water. It was a managed chain, waste to bacteria, nutrients to plants, sunlight to small life to fish, and only then food for people. Most backyard food ponds do not fail because the idea is bad. They fail because the load arrives before the system can carry it. The first mistake is stocking too fast. A new pond can look ready from the surface, while the biology underneath is still thin. Add too many fish at once, and the waste rises faster than the nitrogen cycle can process it. The warning signs are simple: cloudy water, ammonia or nitrate climbing, fish hanging near the surface, and a pond that starts to smell wrong instead of earthy. The second mistake is feeding the pond like a tank. A food pond can use outside feed, especially early on, but uneaten pellets do not disappear. They sink, rot, and become another waste load. If the owner feeds for maximum growth before the pond has enough biological capacity, the system becomes less like an old food pond and more like a small polluted container. The third mistake is letting the helpful parts take over. Duckweed can be useful, but a green blanket across the whole surface is not a victory. It can block light, trap heat, and reduce oxygen exchange at the surface. Algae can also be useful in the right amount, but a heavy bloom can become dangerous when oxygen drops overnight or early in the morning. The fourth mistake is forcing components just because they looked good on paper. Older systems worked because the pond fit inside a larger working landscape. A small suburban yard is different. If a homeowner tries to squeeze every historical layer into a fraction of the space, the result is not an ancient farm. It is a crowded trap. The rule is simple. Every new layer is also a new pressure. More fish, more feed, more plants, more animals, and more nutrients do not automatically make the pond more productive. They only help when the water can process what they add. If the pond cannot absorb that pressure, the loop does not become stronger. It breaks. The problem is that most modern backyards are designed to break the loop. Leaves get raked into bags. Grass clippings leave the property. Kitchen scraps go into the trash or a compost bin far from the water. Rain is pushed toward drains. The lawn is treated like a carpet, the garden like a separate project, and the pond like a feature that should stay clean without asking too many questions. Then a homeowner tries to build a food pond inside that broken layout. The result is usually backward. Instead of letting the yard feed the pond slowly, the pond gets fed from a bag. Instead of letting plants and small life carry part of the system, the water is kept too bare. Instead of asking how much life the pond can process, the owner asks how many fish it can hold. That is a modern mismatch. Older food pond systems made more sense because the pond was not isolated. It sat inside a working landscape. Plant waste, animal movement, sunlight, mud, water, and labor were connected. The pond was not a decoration added after the yard was finished. It was one of the places where fertility moved. A suburban yard does not work that way by default. That does not mean the idea is useless. It means the homeowner has to rebuild some of the missing connections on purpose. The pond needs nearby plant growth, shade in the right amount, and a planted buffer that slows water before it reaches the edge. Nutrients should enter gradually, through managed plant matter and small biological loads, not as sudden pulses the pond cannot absorb. This is where the fancy version fails. It says the pond will feed itself because nature is balanced. But a backyard is not untouched nature. It is a small, fenced, managed space with downspouts, compacted soil, mowing habits, neighbors, pets, heat waves, winter freezes, and limited room for mistakes. So the goal is not to copy an ancient landscape. The goal is to borrow the logic. Keep the pond connected enough to become productive, but controlled enough that one overloaded part does not crash the whole system. An old pond idea becomes risky when it is copied into the wrong climate. That is why tilapia are such a useful warning sign. They show up in many backyard food videos because they can grow quickly in warm water. But fast growth is not the same thing as local fit. In many American backyards, especially outside the warmest regions, tilapia cannot be treated like a permanent outdoor pond fish. In those places, a tilapia pond is one of three things: a seasonal project, a heated project, or the wrong project. That does not make tilapia useless. It just means the fish must match the place, not the fantasy. A homeowner in a cold winter state is solving a different problem than a homeowner in Florida or southern Texas. The water temperature, winter length, local stocking rules, and legal species list all matter before the first fish is purchased. This is where many backyard systems fail quietly. The owner chooses the fish from a video instead of from the region. The pond gets designed around growth speed instead of survival range. By the time the first cold nights arrive, the system stops being a low-input food pond and becomes an emergency project. A better approach starts with local fish first. In some areas, bluegill, catfish, or other region-suited species may make more sense than chasing a tropical fish that needs constant help. They may not sound as exciting in a title, but they give the pond a better chance to behave like a real outdoor system instead of a temporary experiment. Winter also changes the water itself. When the surface freezes, the pond is not dead, but it is sealed off from the air. Oxygen still matters. Gas exchange still matters. A small pond in a freezing climate needs a plan for that season, not just a summer harvest dream. The lesson is simple. The best food pond is not the one with the fastest fish. It is the one whose fish can actually live there. The hardest part of a backyard food pond is that the useful work starts before there is anything impressive to show. In the first few weeks, the pond may look unfinished. Plants are adjusting. Water readings may move around. The edges may look sparse, and the whole project can feel too quiet for the amount of effort that went into it. That is normal. The first stage is not production. It is stabilization. After the pond starts to settle, the signs become easier to read. New plant growth matters more than perfect clear water. A light film of algae may mean sunlight is entering the food web. Insects over the surface may be a good sign, as long as the water is not stagnant. Test readings should begin moving away from danger and toward consistency. The pond is not mature yet, but it is no longer behaving like a brand new hole full of water. At that point, fish can enter slowly. The first fish are not the harvest. They are the stress test. If the biology holds, the pond has passed its first real test. If the water destabilizes, the pond is telling you the load is too heavy and the system needs more time. Around the first growing season, the payoff is usually not abundance. The payoff is pattern. You begin to see which plants hold, which areas overheat, where algae gathers, how fast duckweed needs trimming, and whether the fish can grow without turning the pond into a daily emergency. The food system is becoming visible, but it is still being trained. The second season is where the investment starts to pay back. By then, the edges are more established. Natural feed webs are producing more consistently. Depending on the species and climate, some fish may begin reaching harvestable size. The homeowner is no longer only reacting to problems. They are managing a system they understand. That is the timeline most videos skip. A food pond is not built in a weekend. It is started in a weekend, then proven over seasons. The evidence for a backyard food pond should not be a dramatic claim. It should be a pattern you can film. Look first at the edge. In the beginning, the plants look placed there. Later, they look like they are holding the pond together. Leaves stand up, roots grip. New growth appears without the whole edge turning into a mess. The homeowner still trims, thins, and resets what grows too far, but the edge is no longer decoration. It is doing work. Then look at the water, not perfect clarity. Perfectly clear water can be misleading in a young system. The better sign is steadiness. The surface has movement. The shaded edges stay active. The pond looks alive without looking out of control. When a small load is added, the system responds without swinging wildly. That is not magic. That is stability earned over time. The feed web gives another kind of proof. Insects touch the surface. Small life gathers near the edges. Algae appears in controlled amounts instead of taking over the whole pond. Duckweed, if used, becomes a crop to manage, trim, or feed back into the system, not a green blanket that wins the water. The visible proof is not that the homeowner disappears. It is that the homeowner has something real to manage. Then the fish become the final check. They are not proof because they exist. Anyone can buy fish and put them in water. They are proof when they grow inside a pond that stays stable, when feed becomes support instead of the entire diet, and when harvest becomes part of keeping the system balanced rather than just taking from it. That is the honest evidence. Not one shocking number, not a promise that a small pond replaces a grocery bill. A real food pond proves itself through stacked signals, settled edges, steadier water, managed plant growth, a working feed web, and fish that belong inside the system instead of surviving in spite of it. The old Chinese food pond idea is not worth bringing back because it sounds ancient. It is worth studying because it changes the starting question, not how many fish can I put in this water, but can this water become useful enough to carry fish? That one shift changes the whole project. It slows down the first decision. It makes the homeowner look at sunlight, shade, depth, plant edges, water temperature, local species, and the small biological loads that arrive before the first harvest ever does. That may sound less exciting than a promise of endless food, but it is the version that can actually be tested. Before buying fish, start with the place. Walk the yard after rain. Notice where water moves, where heat collects, where plants already grow well, and where a pond would be stable instead of convenient. Then ask the local question, what fish can legally and realistically live here through the season I actually have? That is the first blueprint, not the pond shape, the decision path. A backyard food pond will still need attention. It may need feed, trimming, aeration, harvest, and seasonal adjustments. But that is not a weakness. That is what makes it a real backyard system instead of a fantasy. The old lesson is not that water feeds people by itself. The lesson is that water can become part of the food system when the yard is designed to help it. So before you copy the pond, copy the logic. Start with the place. Match the species to the climate. Let the water prove itself before you ask it to produce. And if you are thinking about trying a version of this, leave your region and the fish species you are considering in the comments. That one detail changes almost everything.